Alright, what we have here is a 2003 Nissan Altima. This is my brother's car. It's been a really good car, actually. Haven't really needed to do too much to it outside of just general maintenance for the last few years he's owned it. So he was complaining to me a little while back that it started ticking when you'd first start it, and the ticking would disappear after a few minutes. So yeah, knowing very little about this particular series of engine, I'm going to try and do my best to give a as descriptive walkthrough as I can on what to look for and what to do about it. So I guess here goes nothing. This is my first YouTube tutorial video, and yeah, so I figure I'll give a walkthrough on what to do about this problem. It sounds very similar to a stuck valve lifter. It's like a slapping sound, but it goes away very shortly. He's always up on his oil changes and stuff, so I doubt that it is a valve train problem, but again, you never really know until you get in there and you look. So alright, let's give this a go. So I suppose now let's check for codes. He's complaining that it's got, well, low power, or lower power, I guess. He says it's not totally a dog, but it's not as spry as normal. So let's see if we can't have a peek at something here that might point us in the right direction. Pouring rain. It's a weird January weather we're having here. Usually it's like -40. Oh, look at that. Camshaft position timing over advanced or system performance bank 1, and I'll bet you it's got the same one for the other side. Yep. Okie dokie. So we can rule out a valve train problem. Awesome. Well, it's been sitting here a few weeks. He's in Vietnam right now with his old lady. Hopefully it'll start and we can show you guys, well, if anybody's going to watch it anyway, exactly what kind of sound we're talking about here. That. Ugly sound. Holy. Like I said, I've been sitting here for a few weeks, so this is the first start in a little while. Yeah, I don't know if it's coming through, but it's audibly coming from the timing cover. That sounds nasty. Alright. Well, I think I know where we're going with this one. I gotta look. I'm not actually sure if there's any way to take a look at the timing chain tensioner. Because, yeah, I think I'm going to check there first. So we've got the Nissan in the shop. My garbage fire is going bananas out there. Holy Toledo. Whatever. Anyway, so I got it jammed in the corner of the shop here so we can still get our pickup in and out. And evidently my little brother is not the only person to have this issue with this particular car. Or not this particular car, anyway, this series of engine is prone. Apparently there's some plastic timing chain guide that likes to break and fall down and the timing chain becomes loose. So from what I was able to gather in the short time I had investigated the matter online, that cover, that black one right down there, right that one, this one. Apparently, the timing chain tensioner is behind that, and if one is to remove that cover and that tensioner is hyperextended, then that is the problem. Unfortunately for me, I have to get that front cover off, and they shoehorn these engines in there. Should be able to do it though. I got a month and a bit before he's back from NAM, so that should be plenty of time. Hopefully everything goes smoothly. It's relatively inexpensive too to fix on Rock Auto. The parts are quite cheap. This will be about $150 to repair, plus my time. I'm a heavy diesel mechanic by trade, so these little engines are quite simple, but I don't have the necessary extremities to work in there well. So I guess we'll see how this goes. I'll rip as much of it apart as I can, and hopefully we get somewhere with it. Oh, my light decided it doesn't want to work anymore. So I'm gonna try to gain access to that cover, and then I'll hit the record button and see what we can see. Maybe some of you might benefit from this. I'm not really sure. Who knows? Alright, so I've got the Nissan in the shop now, and I've had a few minutes at it. And what I have found is the timing chain guide let go, I guess. And see how it's hyperextended, and directly beneath where the chain tensioner is, you see that metal screw looking thing there? That is the tensioner, the cam chain tensioner, and directly below it is where the end of the tensioner should be. So what's happened is there's a little plastic clip or a plastic retainer that has broken, and I guess has allowed the guide to fall, and it fell off the tensioner, and now the tensioner is like hyperextended. So that's where the timing code was coming from, because the timing chain is now very loose. And there's a few little inspection panels and stuff in here, and you can hear it. There's the ticking sound we were getting there. Just that chain whipping around, right? So yeah, that's the cog still looks okay in there, and the chain still looks okay. I guess we'll know more when we get it off. So if you're having timing codes and ticking and low power and all that good stuff, especially ticking when the engine has just initially started for the first couple of minutes or a couple of seconds, whatever the case is, that is likely your problem. Actually pretty straightforward to remove everything. Harmonic balancer, just good impact gun. This happens to be a standard, so I mean, worst case, I suppose you lock it in gear and have a friend stand on the binders for you, and you can break that bolt off pretty easily. I just had a good impact gun. So there's two inspection covers, one for the tensioner and one for the water pump. Everything came apart pretty easy. You do yourself a whole world of justice pulling the wheel and taking off that little inner fender plastic piece. I found it a lot easier to go from below and access everything that way, rather than try to deal with this shoehorned in V6 from up top. Because like I said before, I don't exactly possess delicate extremities. So it's pretty straightforward, I think. Parts are pretty cheap. I guess next week I'll dive into taking the cover off. I have to devise a way to suspend the engine from the underside so that I can remove that motor mount. And there's a couple other small little odds and ends on this guy I'll fix for him before he gets back. Chiefly that oil leak on the valve cover there. But yeah, I don't think it'll be too bad to do. Guess we'll see how it goes next week. Back to Nissan again. I guess I'm just going to do a quick step-by-step on how to get the front cover off. First thing you got to do is remove the air scoop and go underneath and remove that belly pan. Those trim clips, black trim clips, there's one here and then there's 5 across the front. Those don't always cooperate, so I suggest just taking a pair of decent side cutters and just snipping them off. Trim clips are cheap and available at virtually any auto parts store. You have the belly pan skirt off. There's a plastic plug next to the lower rad hose. Remove it and allow the coolant to drain into a clean receptacle if you plan to reuse it. Remove the rad cap so that it can vent and drain quickly. You can take a pair of pliers like this, or any other kind of plier you got that's a size kind of relative to these spring clips. There's a tool for these spring clips. I have one. It's just at work. Simply squeeze, give it a jiggle to break it free, move it back. Okay, remove your rad hose. It'll be the same process for the bottom. Some coolant may come out. It won't be a lot though because you've drained it. Then the next step would be to reach down those gray plugs there. There's one here and one over here. Unplug those. Remove your wiring harness from the fans. Take it off to the side. Then you're going to want to remove each of your top rad mounts there and there. And after both your hoses are disconnected and your fan wiring is out of the way, the rad should simply lift right out of the cradle. There is a set of ground wires, chassis ground, that share the same loom as the harness for your fan motors. These plastic clips, by the way, I didn't mention it before, they just remove by simply inserting a screwdriver underneath them, between them and their respective place, and gently pry. They should come out very easily and intact, as all of mine have. The fan plug just has a little button you push there. Give it a good push. In my case, big fat fingers, I use a screwdriver. And I wasn't able to do that on the phone, as you need both hands, but you take the screwdriver and you gently just press on that button, and then you pull gently at the same time. Don't yank. You don't want to yank your wires out of your plugs. So that's just a 10mm bolt. Make sure you put it back. It's not there for decoration. For a rad hose that's been on a little while, to get stuck, like you can't really get it off, you know what I mean? So in that case, before you get mad and cut it, take a flathead and a little bit of whatever kind of lubricant you got laying around, WD-40 or whatever you prefer. Soak it a little bit, and then gently take your screwdriver, press it up against the end of the hose, and try to work it in. If it's really stubborn, you can try to open it up a little bit and then get a little bit of lube in there. Lubricant will not hurt a rad hose. And then you just got to kind of work it around, and then that rad hose should come right off, like that. And like I said, you might get a little bit of coolant, but it won't be much. Pull your top rad mount. rad mounts. Take them off, put them somewhere where you're not going to lose them. And as you see, the rad's falling forward. Simply grab it, pick it up, try not to slam it too much. There's still a little bit of coolant in it, so I like just to lean it back like that. I'll take a piece of paper towel or a rag or whatever you got handy and jam it in each of the holes so you don't get any cracks. What we're going to do is we're going to pull the alternator off. There's a 1/2 inch positive lead, 13 mil, 1/2 inch, whichever. Also, the voltage regulator harness. It's important that you not pull on the wire, as both these wires, I'll try to show you, are very thin and maybe easily broken. So what you have to do is just take a screwdriver. There's the button for it there. You take a screwdriver, you push the button, and then you lift the plug out with the plastic, not the wires. Never pull on the wires. If you break one of those, you're either in shitty city and you gotta fix it. I'm sure these terminals are not difficult to acquire, but the tool that crimps them is. So just a side note there. Next thing you're going to want to do is, well, first of all, find your pliers wherever they may be, and then you're going to want to remove that spring clamp, remove that rad hose, and you should be able to gain access then to the alternator mounting bolts. The alternator is down there. What you're going to want to do is there's a 12mm bolt right there at the back. You're just going to want to loosen it. Don't remove it yet. And then at the bottom, now that you got everything out of the way, it's really easy to get to. All you got to do is there's a 14mm nut there, and there's a stud that goes through. It's not a bolt, so you don't have to worry about trying to get a wrench on the other side. You can remove the nut just on the one side, and then you just take your finger, or if it's been on there quite some time, screw the nut on. If you got to hit it so that you don't mess up the threads, or you got to pry it with something so you don't mess up the threads, screw the nut on so that the head of the bolt is flush with the end of the nut, and you can force it out. And then all you got to do is, it sticks out right there. There it is, sticking out right there. I've already pushed it out. Your air conditioning hose here, it will be in your way. You can gently, and I can't stress that enough, move them. You don't want to go very far, no further than you absolutely have to stick one of your mitts in there. And like I said, I got big hands, so this is hard. I'll try the other hand. Stick your hand in there and grab the stud, and you can work it out. You got to give the alternator a jiggle. That's why you want to loosen the top bolt. So you can yank up on it to kind of give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. And there's your stud. And that hook just hooks on the side of the alternator there, so you can't turn it. When you put this back together, I highly recommend using some Never Seas, because if you had to battle with it, it'll make sure that should you ever have to remove the alternator again, that you don't have to fight with it. Next step is just to remove the top bolt the rest of the way, and just kind of give the alternator a wiggle. And what we're going to do is remove the air conditioning compressor. First things first, remove the hanger for the coolant line to the oil cooler, and then I strongly suggest locating and then breaking loose the two rear mount bolts. You can see my air ratchets hanging on one of them, and there's the other. Break those loose before removing the front hardware, and then remove the front hardware, and with one hand support the air conditioning compressor. They're not very heavy. And then remove the 2 back bolts, and then as far as you can, without putting too much stress on anything, just kind of take a bungee cord and bungee cord it so that it's sort of out of your way, and you're not having to move it every time you want to stick your hand in there. You can remove the clutch wire, but that's up to you. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. The next step is to remove your power steering pump. Pretty straightforward there. Remove your power steering oil supply hose. I recommend that you check this hose, that it's still flexible. Squeeze it, pinch it, whatever. If it's becoming stiff, I highly recommend that it be replaced, as when the rubber becomes stiff, it's not as inclined to want to seal, so then you get a leak like we had. I had taken some brake clean and gave her a spray to kind of clean everything up. If you're going to reuse this hose like I am, I also highly recommend that you lose this spring clamp and put a conventional hose clamp on there. A conventional hose clamp isn't, it can't really lose its rigidity, and should the hose become stiff, your seal should remain for some time, and you won't get a leak like we had here, as this hose is still very flexible. So we're going to reuse it. Would also recommend too that you remove it in its entirety from the power steering fluid reservoir. Then there's your banjo fitting here. That's your pressure side. 24 millimeter. We'll break that nut there. There's copper washers inside. That is what seals that banjo housing. You cannot reuse the copper washers. You will have a leak on your hands, and if you don't, you will. So those are really, really cheap. Often just cheaper to buy a kit of those copper washers than it would be to get a hold of somewhere like Nissan and get a hold of just the 2 that you're going to need. So again, I do not recommend you reuse those. Your bolts, your fasteners for your power steering pump. One is right there, or there rather. Kind of just barely see it, but my finger's tapping it. Right there on the outside of your adjuster, and the other is behind your pulley. Interesting. So, I have found, I don't know, quite possibly the most ridiculously placed through bolt I think I've ever seen, and I work on international trucks for a living, so that's saying something. It is 15 millimeter, and it is way the fuck up there. That's the through bolt, and it's a bit of a hoor to get to. Not impossible, but a hoor. Just a heads up, because it's hard to see the back side of the bolt with your head. It's much easier with your cell, sort of. There it is. There's the back of that bolt right there. And yeah, you need to remove the power steering pump because it is clamped right through the front cover. That through bolt is threaded into the front cover. So gay, but figured, I don't know if anybody's gonna try to tackle this job, that I sure would have appreciated it if somebody would have told me about that fucking jewel. So yeah, I've got the other fasteners off the power steering pump, and I'm going to remove that and remove the power steering pump, and of course box it up so that it doesn't get any shit in it. So yeah, just a tidbit there, buds. Remove those, remove your hose. I'm going to remove this hose from the reservoir, and I'm going to put it in a box and tape the box up so that I don't get any contamination in there. Also too, if you happen to have a roll of masking tape, again you can use rags, whatever, definitely going to want to cover up the power steering pump, because if you get any contamination in there, be it rocks and gravel and stuff like that, you could do some damage to your power steering pump internally, and nobody wants that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish pulling this off, and then we're going to figure out if we can devise a way here to hold this engine up while we take that front engine mount right up there, that sucker. If we could take that off without suspending the engine from the top, as I do not have an engine hoist. If you had an engine hoist, it'd make life a whole lot easier. Once you have that back bolt cracked, you can push the power steering pump up out of your way, and then that bolt is rather easy to get at. Once you crack it loose, it actually wasn't that hard to, once I'd kind of busted it loose, it wasn't very difficult to turn. So yeah, after I pushed it up out of the way, it's been smooth sailing. Kind of like an inconsiderate spot. So just yeah, push it up out of your way and keep threading it out, and then it should come off. Next step is going to be drain the engine oil, remove the oil pan. There's a couple bolts for the front cover under there. There's the oil pan, we're going to pop that off. There's two big long bolts, or I guess I don't even know if they're big and long, but there's two bolts for the front cover in there, one there, and one probably right there. And we got to remove those before we can go and take the front cover off. The engine oil drained and the oil pan removed. You're going to want to remove that bolt there and that bolt up there, and then you can get the front cover off. You can use a jack once again to support the engine here. Make sure you have a piece of wood or something between your jack and the engine so you don't damage the aluminum flange. I've removed a couple of things here. I've taken the coolant overflow tank off. Just two 10mm bolts, one there, one there. I'm going to take off the power distribution box right away. It just has one bolt right down there. It's 10mm, or nut rather. And then there's a clip, of course, holding it on here. Few wires, which I will unplug under there. Pretty straightforward stuff. And I'm just going to lift that out of the way so that I can get at the bottom motor mount bolt right there. And then, of course, that one's real easy to get at. So that's the way we're gonna attack this. So just figured I'd throw in a little bit of what I'm doing here now. Motor mount out of the way and the engine held up. Next thing I'm going to want to do here is just kind of remove anything that's bolted to the front cover, obviously. The power steering adjuster bracket, I don't know if you can see that down there. See if we can zoom in on that. Right there, power steering adjuster bracket's got to come off. And the wiring harness has to come off. Those two grounds there, a couple bolts, and then there's that guy. I'm not sure, it doesn't appear to be attached to the front cover, but I don't know, so in a pinch I might have to remove that. And there are, oh, I don't know, probably 20 some odd bolts, it looks like, just a rough estimate. And then I think I should be able to get the front cover off this car and have a peek to make sure that the timing chain's okay, any of the gear cogs haven't been damaged, all that shit, before I go and order parts for it. I'm going to slip the front cover back on after I have inspected everything, and I'm going to put the motor mount bracket back on, just kind of finger everything back together, and then sit it back down on its engine mount where it's supposed to be, so that should anything happen, we're not damaging anything we don't need to. So, the front cover, you're going to want to go ahead and remove your red hose elbow, and there are 3 bolts for that. There's 1, 2, and 3 right there. You're going to remove that. You got the 2 bottom. We've got the 2 bottom bolts out of the crankcase, and our stud is loose, so we should be able to pull everything out relatively easily. I think I'm ready to pull the front cover off. I'm just going to do a little sidebar here. It would appear that the front cover may not come off with this stud in place. This stud followed the nut out when I was taking the lower motor mount bracket off, and it started to come out. So I wasn't able to remove that stud far enough to get the motor mount bracket off. I'm not sure if the front cover will come off with that stud on. So if anybody runs into that problem, what you can do is heat the nut and remove it, or if you got to get the stud out with the nut removed, take the nut down to your local hardware supplier, auto parts store, whichever, and get a nut that has the same thread, jam it up against the OE nut, and you should be able to extract the stud that way. Or unless you got a decent pair of a decent set of stud extractors, but that may not work. I have a set of stud extractors. I didn't have to use them because, like I said, this stud just kind of came out on its own, but I'm not 100% sure if there's enough room in there to use a stud extractor. So I think I am ready to go ahead and pull the front cover. This front cover has alignment dowels all over it. So there's always, with these sorts of things, areas for you to insert screwdrivers and such without fear of damaging anything. So this happens to be one of those areas. There will likely be a couple more. Be ginger, these covers are aluminum, so they may warp easily, or you could break this section off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert this screwdriver here and in any other area that has a similar slot, and I'm just going to break it off of the front of the engine, gently tapping it and rocking it back and forth until I have the front cover removed. It may take some work. You may have to call a buddy and get him to go underneath so you guys can walk it off the alignment dowels. Sometimes dirt gets in there, or sometimes they're a tight fit, or if this is an aftermarket cover, which I can't say whether or not it is, it just simply may not fit correctly, and it may be a tight walk off. So naturally I cannot record this portion as I need both hands. I just figured I'd let you guys know about the pry slots and that lower engine mount bracket dowel. Get the front cover off. Kind of glad I took that stud off. You have to make sure that when you're going to take the stud all the way out, there's not enough room between the frame rail and the front cover to quite get that stud all the way out. So you want to make sure that you're threaded out completely, and you pull the front cover back as far as you can, and then you kind of slide it down so that the bolt's at an angle, and then you can work it out that way. Didn't get dirt on anything or anything like that, so everything looks okay. Now, as far as the timing chain goes, as you can see, it's loose, so that's no good. Like, it's loose here too. There's the culprit right there. There should be a hook on that holding it onto that little platform. As you can see, there's obviously a hook on the bottom, and obviously it has slid down some way. Timing chain's loose, engine's not running very well. I basically opened it up today to make sure that there was no other damage to anything or excessive wear on any of the gears or timing chain guides, and there doesn't appear to be. There's your exhaust cam, and everything appears in not too bad condition. Give that a second to focus. There's no material peening or anything like that. You can kind of see a little mark there, but you can't feel it, so I'll just attribute that to this whole business being out of time. Okay, so what's happened here and why this engine throws timing codes is exactly this. You see, we got a different relationship at this point between the left side of the engine on your screen here and the right, and it'll be quite a ways because you can turn, and I gotta get something to turn that with. Because this timing chain is loose like this, and this side isn't very loose, but it's still looser, more loose than you'd want it to be anyway. There's going to be more chain on this end than on this end, so this cam set here, intake and exhaust, is going to respond differently than this cam set, intake and exhaust. So it takes, actually, there's too much slack in a chain, so as the engine picks up speed, there's a small delay in chain travel between the crank and this cam. So, and it's very loose here too as well, very loose. So there's where the timing codes are coming from. Of that, being able to move these cams independently of the crankshaft due to this chain being loose. Now I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to do this one-handed, but I'll give it a try. I'm turning the left side cam, okay? And I want you to watch the chain. See? You shouldn't have, and that's a measurable amount on both cams. So it's throwing codes, whoops, it's throwing codes, banks 1 and 2, and you watch that cam gear, because there's a lot of slop between the crank and camshafts. Quite a bit. And you can watch it in the chain too. See the chain moving around. The chain should be quite a bit tighter. No good. We're back now with the Nissan, doing the cam chain tensioner. All the parts showed up about 2 weeks or so, not quite 2 weeks after I'd ordered them. You'll need, there is no O-ring or anything for the, or gasket or anything for that matter, for the timing cover itself. It actually is, and they specify it right in the Haynes manual here, that it is RTV sealed. So Pick yourself up a couple bottles of Permatex or whatever brand, Ultra Gray, whatever brand you prefer. I strongly suggest that you do not use high temp red silicone, as it is not, and I mean is not, very good working with oil, especially if you're going to run synthetic oil. Get something like Permatex Ultra Gray, or an approved engine assembly RTV, something that it does deal well with oil, or you're going to have problems in the near future. Red silicone, Permatex Ultra Red, in my experience, it doesn't hold up to component movement, so it'll end up shearing off, or it can be permeated by oil. So, especially like if you're sealing up a banjo housing or something on your half-ton or whatever, you'll end up with a leak in no time. So, strongly recommend that if you're going to use RTV, which in this case you have no choice but to use RTV, that you use an RTV that is oil resistant or oil proof or approved for engine assembly, or anything to that extent anyway, whatever the manufacturer recommends. And they state directly in this manual, I glossed over everything right quick, and they state directly in this manual that you're supposed to use an oil resistant RTV silicone. And the rest of the parts showed up. This here's the new timing chain guide to replace the one that's broken. As you can see, it's attached. Let's get it out of the bag here. As you can see, it's well attached, like it's supposed to be. Not fallen. There's where the timing chain tensioner presses up against, and in our case it has fallen away. So, and they're allowed to fall. They've cut a little bit. So, and there's your gasket set, or your O-ring set, and there's the front engine seal, and a little bag of O-ring grease comes in the kit. There's the part number for the kit. There's the part number for the tensioner, or a tensioner guide. And there's the new tensioner. As you can see, it's not fully extended. I'd imagine that this is compressed quite a ways. So, I can probably tell you with 100% certainty that when we release this lock, it will come out a little ways. So, but not as far as what we have there. And there's the Beck-Arnley part number for that. And before I bought these parts, I had come up with the brand Beck-Arnley because that is what Rock Auto was selling as an OEM quality replacement part. So I had done a little bit of research on it after I'd seen that that's what they were selling as a replacement, an OEM replacement, and apparently as far as import cars go, that is fact. It is a quality replacement item, so we went with it. Price was real good. Oil and filter, of course. Here. You can see it's not in great shape, obviously. And look at that little mark where the timing chain tensioner had been pushing on it, or it had been slapping. I wonder if that's maybe what the sound was and not so much the chain. There's no mark or anything on the timing chain tensioner itself, but that sucker is definitely where we were slapping. And this is the new one. Pretty much identical. So hopefully this one stays together longer, I hope. Bolt clean, I've got its hole clean. Maybe it might be good to note that prior to assembling this, that you can either use engine assembly grease or just some clean engine oil and apply a little to the pivot and the pin and a very small film down the timing chain guide if you like to. Also, you can apply a small amount to the tensioner, the end of the tensioner. Just for good practice, when you do torque down the tensioner bolts, go over them twice, push very lightly and as smoothly as you can on the torque wrench to ensure that any oil that might be on the flange surface between the tensioner and the cover or backside of the front cover can be expelled as the tensioner comes down into contact with the flange. So go over it 2, maybe 3 times. It's good practice. It just ensures that there's no hope in heck that that's going to come loose after you've torqued it to manufacturer's specification. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is install the tensioner guide, and then we're going to torque that to spec. And that spec is main timing chain guide pivot bolt, 120 to 166 inch-pounds. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'll just hold this over this whole page for a second in case there's a spec anybody who might watch this might want. Okay, so I'm not sure how clear this will be if you pause it, so just get a good look. What we're going to go ahead and do now is I've cleaned both these bolt holes for the tensioner, and I've cleaned the bolt hole for the tensioner guide, and of course clean the bolts, and I'm going to go ahead and install those now. The hydraulic tensioner bolts are 82 inch-pounds, and the guide pivot bolt is also 61 to 82 inch-pounds. There, have a read there. And I'm going to go ahead and install those and torque them to spec with an appropriately sized torque wrench. Right quick. And I went online and verified everything, and I will attach the pictures that I was using as reference to this video. So, what I'd seen on my fellow YouTuber's video is you rotate the engine until this mark and that dowel are at the same angle as the piston, so they'll be off to your right a little bit. So you're looking directly at it, it's up, and they're both facing the same angle as what your cylinder deck would be pointing at, and they're facing up, and that one, see that, and that are also facing up at approximately the same angle as your cylinder head deck would be. What I also saw by accident here was a reference mark in the engine. Yeah, that's a handy dandy little tidbit. I wish the Haynes manual would have had that. So I lined that up. Actually, I found that by accident after I'd kind of moved everything to where both sets of cams were in the correct position. I had looked and was inspecting everything very closely when I found that little mark there. There's one on the right-hand bank, and then there's the other right there. Look at that. So those are in line with the dowel, mark and mark, and those two marks, and your cylinder or crankshaft keyway, your crank balancer keyway serves as its own reference mark, and there's another reference mark in the back of the cover. That's your mark, number 1 TDC. So that tells me, and after I'd rotated this engine, I don't even know how many fucking times by hand, looking for these colored links that are apparently exist, I found one, wherever the hell it is. I'm not even sure where it is now. It's MIA. See if we can find it. That's one I colored myself because I thought it was a different color than the others, but it wasn't. Where's that colored link? It's fucking yellow. There was only one. Oh, there it is, right there in front of my face. Right there. That is the one colored link that this chain had. They were telling me in the manual there's supposed to be 3, and you roll the engine over until those marks correspond with that alignment mark right there in the sprocket. And there are alignment marks in all 3 sprockets. I couldn't find the other 2 colored links, so I was really glad I stumbled upon that fella's YouTube channel and that video about timing this VQ, because that is handy dandy. So in addition to being very careful that you don't disturb the camshafts or the crankshaft when the timing chain is loose, it's always a good idea to verify your timing. So I've done that here, so we're good there. Good there. And we're good there. And can't really get straight on at it. Maybe it'd be better if and we're good there. So I don't think that's a tooth off. I'm going to pull this bolt and get a better look just to make sure I didn't bump the crank or anything stupid by accident. Make sure that it's pretty straight on. So I think we're good. I've rotated the engine, oh, I don't know, probably a dozen fucking times, if not more. Probably more. And hadn't felt any piston valve collision or anything out of the ordinary, other than a little bit of compression leak by, which is normal when you have the oil pan off and you're rotating an engine slowly by hand. It is totally normal to hear some air hissing. So if you're doing this and you hear that little bit of air hissing, don't panic. So yeah, just thought I'd include that in this little video here. So I'm just going to remove that bolt and make sure that that is actually dead on, but it looks like it's totally dead on. So perfect. Pulled the balancer bolt out of the end of the crank and just have a gander at that. I don't know about you guys, but that looks pretty fucking dead on to me. And then we have both our camshafts facing up, and I'd say that that's about as close as we're ever gonna get it, eh? And we got the same thing back here. That is fucking brilliant. So shout out once again to Turo's FM channel, and yeah, thank you big time for doing that little display on the camshafts there. Quite happy about that. Quite happy that nothing came out of time. I think we're golden. I think we're golden. Perfect. Now what I'm going to do is I've taken the lock out of the cam chain tensioner. I've verified that my marks are in the right spot. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the engine using that keyway and mark in the front cover as a reference. I'm going to rotate the engine 8 times, bring the marks back to the same spot, and if I don't have any resistance and my marks still line up, the chain nice and tight, I'm going to go ahead and begin reassembly. Like I said, undone or removed the timing chain tensioner lock, and I rotated the engine 8 times, not 10. I'm not really sure why I said 10. And now I'm just going to quickly re-verify that everything lines up. So that's exhaust cam, dowel, and its mark. And both those cams are pointing in the same direction in relationship to the cylinder head deck. And verified that dowel lines up with that timing mark. Yeah, that's pretty good. And can't really do it with the phone, but they're both pointing at the correct angle. And our timing key and our mark are in the correct position. So if all these things being true, this engine is in time and we shouldn't have any problem when we go to start it. So I've rotated it several times. Any resistance that you encounter when you're rotating this engine, because you have the oil pan off, those resistances should be accompanied by a gentle hissing sound as compressed air escapes the piston rings due to low speed rotation. So valves aren't hitting, everything moves good, all alignment marks as far as the sprockets are concerned, all lined up the way they should. Cover on, motor mounts on, everything's kind of hooked up. I don't have any of the little things put together or any of your belts on, but your water pump's chain driven and you're full of antifreeze, so I figured I was going to try and give her a go before I put everything together, just in case something happened or I missed something or failed to do something correctly and resulted in its failing to start. So I guess this is my favorite part of my job, and the part that makes me the most nervous is first start. So let's put your battery back on. I cranked it over by hand last week and then again this week and a few but dozen times, and everything feels good. No irregular noises, lots of compression, doesn't hit anything. Everything seems to feel okay, so hopefully it just cranks and starts. So I guess we're going to find out right fucking now. This part always makes me nervous.
Look at that. Hey, no ticking, no nothing. Your alternator light is on because the alternator is not hooked up. But it's purring like a kitten. Listen to that. Just the way God intended. Isn't that beautiful? I increase down a little bit, but that's normal. Not even so much as a fucking tick or a hesitation, J-man. How do you like that? No check engine light or fuck all, I don't think. Nope, nothing. Nice exhaust pitch. It sounds fuck of a lot better than it did. That's for damn sure. Oh yeah, throttle response is fucking instant. Well, hopefully it makes power like it used to. I know you really liked that about this thing, and I thought I'd fix her for you. Just gonna let it run for a sec, I guess. Terrific.